Fire Country's characters won't know what hit them when the extremely likely Leone tragedy becomes reality, impacting the lives of Fire Country's main characters and some secondary ones. Fire Country Season 3's cliffhanger ending and the report of Billy Burke exiting ahead of Season 4 make Vince's death almost certain, and the consequences of his loss will reverberate across Edgewater. Fire Country established the Leone centrality in Edgewater from the beginning, not without problems, given the conflicts arising from their role. The firefighting drama also detailed the lives that were touched by Vince specifically, with his connections showing how he was part of the town's fabric. Vince's role can thus make his death extremely impactful in Fire Country Season 4. 8. Bode losing Vince pushes him closer to potentially relapse. Vince's death reminds Bode that he can never have closure. Vince's death can hit Bode the hardest because of their complicated bond, which took more than one season to heal. Although Bode and Vince's relationship was better in Fire Country Season 2, with Vince trusting Bode, Vince's approach changed greatly when difficulties arose. This couldn't have been more evident with Walter's illness, which Vince refused to see for so long. Bode and Sharon being Vince's family would already be a good enough reason for his death to affect them the most. However, it's Bode's relationship with Vince being conflictual and their refusal to acknowledge their terrible behavior in the aftermath of Riley's death that promise Fire Country Season 4 to be Bode's worst year yet. Bode and Vince never explicitly talking about their lowest moments means Bode will never have closure, promising to haunt him in Fire Country Season 4. Considering how Vince also displayed hints of his worst self when he discovered that Bode had contacted a doctor for Walter, it's clear he wasn't ready to acknowledge his failings, precluding Bode from getting closure. Bode and Vince's history, coupled with the fact that Vince and Sharon wouldn't have entered the Buena Vista building had Walter and Bode not played heroes, points to Bode taking Vince's death even harder than in any other context. With everything that happened, Bode will likely have to grapple with guilt after being the reason Vince entered the burning building. 7. Sharon being widowed upends her life and forces her to rely on Mickey. Sharon had Vince to count on for most of her life. Vince's death affecting Sharon seems apparent given their being husband and wife, but the extent to which the development will influence Sharon isn't as obvious. Fire Country made a point to show the struggles as well as the most heartwarming moments between Vince and Sharon, but it didn't focus on how long the couple had relied on one another's presence. Despite Renee's introduction in Fire Country Season 3 having to do with Oxalta, the revelation that she and Vince were high school sweethearts made Vince and Sharon's relationship timeline clearer. Vince and Sharon getting together right after Vince and Renee's breakup highlighted their being together since their late teens or early 20s, making them spend 2/3 of their lives together. Losing Vince unexpectedly after so much time together will inevitably hit Sharon hard. However, Sharon's reaction can be made worse by the fact that she was also caught in the Buena Vista roof collapse. This can let the time of Sharon's recovery and the immediate aftermath of Vince's death coincide, making her more susceptible to feeling guilty for surviving Vince. 6. Luke losing Vince means their complicated bond will never have closure. Vince's death means his and Luke's conflict can never be fully resolved. Luke Leone has never been a constant presence in Fire Country, and when he appeared, he butted heads with his older brother Vince. Conflict characterized their relationship, with Vince faulting Luke for Bode's addiction problems, and indirectly, for Riley's death, despite Bode being sober when the car accident happened. Vince dying thus makes it impossible for Luke to find closure, while Fire Country Season 3, Episode 13 gave what was likely their last meeting a moment of levity by letting them set up a playful revenge against the rival town that Edgewater played against. It didn't solve their conflict. Luke living in Japan during the Buena Vista fire makes his reaction potentially even worse, as he couldn't try saving Vince. 5. Walter surviving the Zeeble Ridge fire while losing Vince can worsen his condition. Vince dying after his and Walter's conversation can be heartbreaking for Walter. The complicated relationships among the Leone men have been a staple of Fire Country, and their difficulties in openly talking about them derive directly from how Walter raised Vince and Luke. Walter's illness in Fire Country Season 3 didn't make the challenging bonds any easier, with his symptoms highlighting Walter's bias when his sons were concerned, especially at Vince's expense. What can hurt Walter even more is his Fire Country Season 3, Episode 17 let Vince and Walter bond over a family recipe, but that didn't solve their deep-seated issues. Similarly, their heart-to-heart in Fire Country Season 3's ending had them acknowledge their shortcomings, but it was too close to the tragic roof collapse and obviously prompted by their sensing that they were in mortal danger. Were Vince to die and Walter to survive in Fire Country Season 4, it would haunt Walter due to his seemingly viewing Luke as his favorite son and his hand in getting Sharon and Vince to re-enter the building. However, what can hurt Walter even more is his memory loss, which can force him to relive losing Vince after forgetting. 4. Vince's looming death leaves Manny without one of his closest allies. Manny couldn't have thrived without Vince's support in Fire Country. Sharon and Manny's alliance about Bode often painted them as the closest, but Vince was just as much Manny's friend. When Manny had gambling problems in Fire Country Season 1, it was Vince who helped him out before the situation got too bad. When Manny ended up in 3 Rock again, he had Vince and Sharon look out for Gabriella. Vince supported Manny when few others would have, and their bond became stronger as a result. While Vince's death could push Manny and Bode closer in Fire Country Season 4 and help both of them as a result, Vince's death will inevitably hit Manny hard, because of its suddenness and because it deprives Manny of one of his biggest friends. Jake's ambitions after Vince's death can riddle him with guilt. Vince gone can help Jake become battalion chief like he wanted and fill him with guilt. Jake and Vince's relationship has been dire in Fire Country Season 3's second half since Station 42's captain heard Vince promise Bode that the firehouse would be his. Bode working at Station 42 made Jake feel ignored by the Leones once before, despite their insistence that Jake was family to them. This effectively prompted Jake to lash out at Vince.